Well, the phrase poems without words might seem like a bit of an oxymoron, or maybe it doesn't make sense, but it makes perfect sense to the artists of the University of Manitoba Symphony Orchestra. Their first concert of 2025 is entitled Poèmes sans paroles, or Poems Without Words, and it features a wide range of pieces from violin mastery and British and French soundscapes to Canadian compositions and new works. One new work in particular is drawing attention, Materia for Orchestra, written by U of M student composer Tamir Moore-Freedman. Tamir is just one of the students featured in Poèmes sans paroles. Violinist Amir Bissen will be a featured soloist in the concert, led, as always, by conductor Monica Chen. Monica, Amir, and Tamir join us live in the Classic 107 studios this morning. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Nice to see you all. So maybe we'll start with you first, Monica. The title, Poèmes sans paroles, very evocative. Tell us a little bit more about that title.
Yeah, so it took me some time to think about how to title this concert. And part of it is we have a very prominent Canadian composer, Violet Archer, who was taught by the the composer who taught all the composers, Nadia Boulanger. And as a Canadian composer, she has a very interesting, both kind of British and French sounds imbued in her music. And so from that, I thought about her piece itself is called Poem. And then on the bookend, to start the concert, we start with Violet Archer, and at the end of it, we end with Ruth Gibbs' Symphony No. 2, which is of many of the works that I was searching for at the time, it's really quite well written in terms of a long, and it's one of her most prominent works as well, a 20-minute long symphony in one movement, as is the title. But between these two giant masterworks, we also are featuring our students. And then I wanted to bookend it in that way, both in the program. And also, Mendelssohn has a song without words.
Yes.
So tying all that together into Poèmes sans paroles, that's kind of how it all tied together and brought out the title.
A work that we've featured many times here on Classic 107, those Poems Without Words by Mendelssohn. Violet Archer maybe finds herself on concert programs a little bit less than Mendelssohn. For people who haven't been exposed to the music of Violet Archer before, how would you describe sort of the soundscape that she creates?
You know, I always thought the beginning of this poem, it always makes me think like I'm sinking deep into the underwater sea. And it has a lot of French influence because she studied with Nadia Boulanger in Paris. And so it has some like Ravel in it as well. It sounds almost more French than it sounds English. And it has that kind of quirky, but also has the build at which it goes into is also very French as well. So
okay. So in Poèmes sans paroles, this, as I say, a very evocative title and very much illustrated by the way that you've been describing the music, Monica. I'm wondering, Tamir, when you hear that phrase, Poème sans paroles, or a poem without words, what comes to your mind as a composer, or if you're trying to create poetry without words, what's sort of that first reaction that you might have as you create your own music?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, a big part of writing music is being able to express myself in a way that words don't always do justice. I'm always very particular about the way that I talk and speak to people. Sometimes I try to take a little too long to find the words, but I feel like with music, there isn't always that disconnect. It feels like however I'm feeling, I'm trying to kind of beam that directly into your soul.
Okay. A very direct sort of approach then you're taking to eliminate language or supersede language to then insert that communication into your listener or your audience. Maybe Amir, I'll ask kind of a similar question to you. When you hear the phrase poème sans parole, or a poem without words, what kind of emotion or feeling are you trying to then capture as a performer when you're performing in a program like that?
Well, in terms of playing Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, I guess it does apply to this very ambiguous title in a way. But for me personally, Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto is very dear to my heart since I first learned it when I was 10.
Wow.
And I've played it at least 3 or 4 times since then. And it's especially nice to be playing it this time around with Monica, because she actually also played it back in her violin days.
Oh, wow.
So we both know the work really well, and playing it with the University of Manitoba's Symphony Orchestra is also especially nice since I've been playing with that orchestra since the beginning of last academic year, and it almost feels like playing with family, really.
Wow. So maybe going back to that first time you played Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto when you were a 10-year-old, growing up, as I understand it, in Kazakhstan.
Yep.
What was it about Mendelssohn's music for the violin that spoke to you the first time that you played it?
Well, I really liked the way all 3 movements sort of seamlessly interconnect with one another. And also, already at that age, I've noticed that it's one of those concertos that doesn't have this kind of classical introduction of the orchestra. You immediately begin with this kind of haunting sounding melody, and well, it posed quite a lot of challenges. And but where I was learning the violin, it was one of those kind of staple concertos that you had to learn at quite an early age.
Okay.
So
Very interesting. What sorts of, as you're working with someone else who has performed the work, what sorts of ideas on how to perform it have you and Monica kind of come to understand about the work, and what can people expect from this performance of the concerto at Poèmes sans paroles this week?
Well, during the rehearsing process with Monica, obviously we discussed a lot of sort of violinistic aspects of the concerto, and since we played it before, as I mentioned, I'm sure it's going to sound sort of extra nice. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, in the midst of all of that, of course, we've talked about very established pieces by Mendelssohn and Ruth Gipps and Violet Archer, but then there's this new piece that you've written, Tamir, Materia for orchestra. Tell me a little bit more about the origins of that piece and how it fits into this program.
Sure. So when I was trying to write this, or beginning to write this piece, I knew that this was going to be the last large ensemble piece that I would be writing in my bachelor's degree. So I wanted to go out with a bang.
All right.
Usually when starting a piece, I think a lot of composers will be able to relate to this. You kind of start by giving yourself restrictions. For this piece, I started, and I wanted to be as uninhibited as I possibly could, and just do all the things that I'm the best at doing. It has, as most of my pieces do, it has it's soaked in jazz,
All right.
among other things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What is it about jazz that influences this score? And maybe as you've been interacting with the other music that's on this program, what does Materia have to say about this idea about not having words in poetry?
Jazz is, it's how I entered kind of the academic sphere of music. So I entered the music program at U of M initially as a jazz student.
Okay.
So I have a deep connection to it. My connection to classical music is kind of more of a newer thing for me, and I've been learning a ton. I haven't had too much interaction with the other pieces on the program other than just hearing them in rehearsal, and it's been really great hearing that and seeing the dedication from the orchestra.
Is it you talk about the limitations that you put on yourself as a composer to try and narrow that sort of creative stream for making a composition like this, as you say, the last sort of large-scale one in your bachelor's degree, is that limitation that you are in like a classical music sphere and that you're not working like purely in some in a jazz sort of space, or is it a natural thing to find yourself in a more orchestral sort of medium to create materia for orchestra?
Sure. Yeah, I absolutely love writing for orchestra. Of the many modes of composition that I've gone through, orchestra might be my favorite. I really love writing for large ensembles. It's probably my favorite that
Cool.
I've had.
That's awesome. Monica, maybe I'll throw it to you for having worked with Tamir's score now. How have you felt materia sort of materialize, if you will, into this program that you've so carefully devised?
Yeah, so it's definitely, materia was not fully composed when this program was already set, as he was still composing it through the fall term.
In a very sort of classical composer fashion, where where Mozart's writing overtures to operas on the day of the premiere. So well done.
Except for, of course, Tamir brought the music to us in a very timely manner.
Right,
so
good. Right. No,
issue.
of course.
So I really I didn't know what it was going to sound like.
Okay.
But when I opened it, I did notice immediately the jazz influences that he was talking about. And it is quite, I would say, accessible as well to the audience in terms of the tonal qualities. And then there's still some notes that he likes to put in there, a little bit more crunchy and flavorful, that gives a little bit of that edge, right? And I think he's very carefully thought about the textures of the sound and how he would lay in there. But there are definitely, in a very concise 6-minute piece, he's definitely explored a lot of different areas, melodically, texturally, for musical materials for materia.
What do students take away from participating in a score that is freshly written by one of their peers, Tamir? What do those students take away from performing in an environment like that, in a very much newly formed creation, alongside of performing something that's incredibly well established, like Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto?
I think it's a very important skill to be developing, and something to be celebrated as well, to be also in the sphere of performing new music that hasn't been performed before, or has been rarely performed, or things that haven't been on the radar. And in this case, 3 of the 4 pieces on this program, they likely have not heard of, even potentially not even the composer before they start the piece. And then in terms of material, with an actual living composer in the room, they can actually ask questions. And I think it draws also a more critical eye for them to really explore, what do these notes and markings on the piece actually mean for me as a player, and how does it contribute to the piece? And they can ask questions, like, is this dot really, is it supposed to be there? Who am I supposed to be playing with? Like, is it just me? Like, those kind of questions that really draw a critical eye for them, that I think is quite important as performers. Yeah.
So you talk about these questions, very pragmatic sort of musical questions. What does this dotted note mean, as an example? Tamir, maybe the last question I'll have about materia is, what sorts of other questions were you being asked about your work by your fellow students, and what was it like to interact with them about this creation that you have made for this concert?
Well, I've learned so much from the other students, and from Monica too, just of course on like the more pragmatic end of things. This is not going to be as loud as you're thinking it's going to be, etc.
Sure. Okay.
But we started off by just talking a little bit about what I meant with the piece, and I think that was a really good jumping off point. Especially when a lot of older pieces might not have names that are like giving you a ton of information, so they can actually talk to me about what the piece means to me and why I wrote it, and I think that's it can be valuable for both of us. So
for both performers and composer, I would imagine. All of this taking place this week, February the 6th at 7:30 at the Desautels Concert Hall. So excited to hear not only Materia, but also Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto performed by Amir Bissen. Monica, Amir, and Tamir, thank you so much for joining me here in the Classic 107 studios today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.